All right, folks, this is going to be the third video in the series where I'm breaking down my traditional archery shot. In the first two videos, we talked about stance and posture and then bow hand position. In this video, we're talking about form. If you've ever studied jiu-jitsu, one of the very first concepts that you're going to learn is to create frames. This allows you to use your skeletal structure to keep your opponent from getting too close. And it is much more powerful and effective than simply using your strength to try to push them away from you. In archery, the same framing concept applies, but instead of trying to keep your opponent from crushing you, we're using it to create a stable and steady platform to draw, hold, and release that arrow. In both sports, strength comes second to technique. The objective of good archery form is to maximize stability through good geometry of our skeletal structure, which then in turn allows us to minimize the use of muscle. When we achieve that good alignment and that good geometry, it makes us much more stable holding that bow on target as we work through the rest of the shot cycle, which we're going to cover later on in this series. Think of form as the foundation that your shot is built on, and if your foundation is shaky, the rest of your shot's going to be unstable as well. When drawing a bow, we are holding two opposing forces apart. Now, if we think about that in terms of geometry and the forces applied, the most efficient manner to do that would simply be to put a solid beam between them so that the forces are directly opposite and driving into one another. In this example, there's no lateral forces to compensate for. Now, that's great in theory, but there's no real practical application in archery. Our bodies just won't allow for it. But although there's no practical application in archery, it does give us a theoretical ideal. The closer to which we can get, the more stable we become. With the structure of our bodies, the closest that we can get to that theoretical ideal is a simple triangle, with the bow hand, the drawing shoulder, and the drawing elbow forming the only vertices. Everything else is in a straight line. When we can achieve this shape, the forces exerted by the bow drives nearly straight into the bow arm shoulder through the upper body to the drawing shoulder. This reduces lateral forces and the need to use muscle to hold the drawing arm in position. Additionally, the arrow and the drawing forearm form a straight line, eliminating any lateral forces there. From the side, the forearm is directly in line with the pressure point of the bow hand. In this position, back tension and little else is enough to hold the bow on target and steady at full draw. Instability and inconsistency become problems when we add extra vertices, and that's usually at the bow shoulder and at the drawing wrist. These positions create a less stable platform because you have to engage additional muscles in order to hold them. The three most common mistakes that I see in archery form are misalignment of 1, the bow arm with the shoulders, 2, the drawing forearm with the arrow, and 3, the drawing forearm with the pressure point on the bow hand. In the ideal position, the bow arm and the shoulders should create a straight line. When we do this, most of the force that the bow is exerting is driven straight up the arm, through the shoulders, to the drawing shoulder. There is a little bit of lateral force, meaning force this way, but we reduce that when we reduce this angle. Some people, the way that their body is shaped, it's just difficult for them to get into perfect alignment with their arm, making a straight line through their shoulder. And second, if you are bow hunting, especially in cold weather, it can be impractical to do that just simply because of the clothing that you have to wear. If you ever watch archery competitions, especially like the Olympic style shooting, all of those guys and gals have compression vests on, which compress that clothing on their bow shoulder and create some string clearance. You don't ever see bow hunters wearing that stuff. One, because it reduces the insulation of your clothing. And so the way to get around that is to open your form up a little bit and create an angle with your bow arm and your shoulders. Now, this gets us away a little bit from that ideal archery form, that ideal triangle, because it does create another vertices right here, and that creates a fault line or a weak point in your archery form. Now, the more you open that up, the more unstable it becomes. And so the idea is to try to reduce that angle as much as possible, but still get good string clearance past your bow shoulder. The second most common thing that I see, and this really comes into play with new shooters is a misalignment of the forearm with the arrow as seen from a top view. And what I'm talking about here is primarily using bicep muscle to draw the bow instead of back tension. When you see someone drawing like this, with their elbow pointed out, their forearm is not in line with the arrow, and the only way to draw a bow that way is to use your bicep. You don't need to use your bicep when you use your back tension and you have good archery form. When everything is aligned and you are drawing with back tension, your forearm, your bicep should be very relaxed. When you draw like this, you create an angle right here, and that's that second vertices. The third most common thing that I see is creating an additional vertices in the wrist, but on a different plane, and this one is from the side. So ideally, from the side view, your forearm is going to be pointed directly at the pressure point of your bow hand. And so your elbow will be up a little bit to create that straight line through here. But oftentimes people trying to get to a good anchor, or what they feel is a good anchor, will try to manipulate that string up on their face so that this no longer is pointed at the pressure point of the bow, but pointed up this way somewhere. I've been asked to address something called a rotational draw because this is something that is very, very prevalent in high-level archery. So I'm going to go over my interpretation of rotational draw, but if you want to know more about this technique, I'm going to refer you to another fella that's got some older videos on YouTube, and that's Arnie Moe. He was an archery coach, and he does a very good job at describing this method of drawing a bow. And so rotational draw is all about using your body for the most efficient draw possible. And there's never really a misalignment between the forearm and the arrow. It creates a straight line, and it uses a motion similar to that to get the arrow back and drawn. And so in a rotational draw, you start with the arrow across your body. You're not pointing the arrow at the target and have an angle at your wrist. You'll see me do that sometimes, and that's really a mistake on my part. I shouldn't do that. I should start with the arrow aiming across my body so that there's never a misalignment here. Now, a rotational draw that I most often see is guys will start above their head. And this is where I vary a lot from that because I am primarily a bow hunter. I don't like that extra little bit of movement. But for the case of describing what it is, I'll go ahead and show you. So start above your head, no misalignment here, straight line. So the arrow is being drawn from the back, comes around and into the face. All right, so I've talked a little bit about back tension and how important that is for good form, proper alignment, consistent shooting and all that stuff. But back tension is one thing that confuses a lot of people. I know that when I first started, I didn't really have a good understanding of what people were talking about when they said back tension. And the thing that helped me, I think it was on the second video in the Masters of the Barebow series, which is a DVD series that was produced back in the 90s, and it's a very good resource for learning how to shoot well. I think it was Larry Yin who had described it as when you come back to full draw, you imagine someone's hand on the back of your drawing elbow, and you just try to push that hand back. So back tension is not a pulling or a lengthening of your draw length. That requires other muscles that you don't need to engage. Back tension, when done properly, is a rotation around your body. And when you do it right, you'll feel it in that muscle right underneath your scapula, right here. When you have good form and you get into good alignment, you almost get a similar effect to a let-off on a compound, because when you get into good alignment, it takes much less strength and less muscle to hold that bow at full draw versus having a big angle here and a big angle here, using your biceps and being all out of alignment. That, if you shoot that way, it is very, very fatiguing because it does require all those muscles, and it also is very unstable. So I'm going to go ahead and show you some slow motion video of me shooting from both overhead and in front of me. Now, I'm not offering this up as a model for perfect form. I can go ahead and tell you right now that I do not have perfect form. I don't have a perfect follow through. I don't have a perfect archery shot, and anybody that really knows what to look for will be able to pick out those little errors in my shooting. But that's one of the great things about traditional archery, is it always gives you something to strive for. So here we go. So before we end this video, I want to let you know about another channel that I personally have found to be very helpful. One, I mentioned Arnie Mo earlier. He's a very good resource on YouTube. But there's another channel called Archery Winchester. And this guy, he doesn't have a lot of videos on YouTube, but the ones that he does have, especially on archery, the biomechanics of archery, are very helpful in helping people understand exactly what's happening and how those forces, all of those forces that I've been talking about in this video, how they apply in archery. Another thing that he has covered that is very informative is when he breaks down the release of top level archers and what the reaction is after the release, in the wrist position, in the follow through, and all of those things. So if you're looking to really understand how all of this stuff works together, go and check out Archery Winchester. There's some great resources there. All right, guys, so I haven't decided on where I want to go from here. We may cover some more of the physical aspects of archery, or we may get into the mental side of things, which is absolutely massive. But if you guys have a preference on what area you want to see on the next video, just leave them in the comments and I'll try to build a video around that. But with that, if you haven't subscribed, we got a lot more videos coming in this series. Go ahead and do that, and we will see you guys next time.